Good afternoon. Today is Tuesday, April 6th, and a special board meeting is called to order. I want to welcome any budget committee members who are joining us today. This is a board meeting, not a budget committee meeting, but since this meeting is centered on learning about the budget process, we've invited our budget committee members to participate. Okay, so the board members that are present right now, school board members, Director Hyen, Director Inojos Pressy, myself, Director Carson Cottingham, and Director Guzman Ortiz. Budget committee members are Jacqueline Bechtel. I'm sorry if I am messing up people's names. Barbara Guillot, Lisa Harnish, Levy Herrera Lopez, Oni Marchbanks, Nancy McMorris Audix, and Lara Million. At this time, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Superintendent Perry. But I will call on people with questions. I'll help chair the meeting, but really the meeting is being run by Superintendent Perry. Thank you so much.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and it's great to see you. We thought this might be a good format for us this year to do these quick little 45-minute once a week lunch sessions. We know some of you are in the middle of your workday and may need to be off camera for a little bit to eat lunch. That's okay. They'll go kind of full of information, but at 12:45, we're going to do a hard stop to be really respectful of people's time. And then we'll set up a kind of a process for how you can get some additional questions answered about the information that we presented in order to further your learning. So I do want to introduce a couple people that are on the line with us today. First of all, Bob Silva is here. He's our Chief Operations Officer. Bob, if you want to wave. Sarah Head, our Director of Financial Services, is here with us today.
Hello.
Olga Cobb, Assistant Superintendent, is here today. And then the other person I want to introduce, I know there's more people on the line here. I don't know if Ethan has come on, but Amanda Herbal is our assistant to the Chief Operations Officer, and she's going to be the communicator with you related to all. Hi, Amanda. It's great to see you. She's going to be the communicator with you about all things budget. So even if I get questions, I'm often passing them to her to track with us on a spreadsheet and all of that. And then Ethan Udos-Natar, other assistant superintendent, jumped on. Hi, Ethan. And I think John Bate is on as well. Hi, John. He's our director of HR. And this is your team of people that will help navigate the budget process with us, that will help field questions. And so even though a lot of questions come to me, I often have lots of help being sure that we answer them. So today I'm just going to start from the beginning about how we fund schools and take you through what for some of you will be repeat information, but for others of you will be new. I'll also try to get you into our current budget book if we have time at the end, and then try to save some time for questions as well. So with that, I'm going to do my screen share, and Ethan, you'll be super impressed today because I'm going to run my own slides. All I want is kudos from you, Ethan, about the slides.
That makes me a little bit nervous. That means I'm dispensable now.
Oh, you're not. you are not. All right. So like I said, I'm going to start kind of from the beginning, a little bit of kind of how schools are funded, our state school fund grant, all of that. Apologize to people that this is a repeat for. So first of all, we are funded both with state funds and with our local property taxes. All that is kind of wrapped up in what's called a state school fund grant. The state school fund grant comes to the district as a revenue formula, which takes into account the local needs and resources and state needs and resources, and allows the funding statewide based on an equalization formula. So the way it works is we take in property taxes. Other districts take in property taxes. Everyone has different amounts, but the state equalizes it by layering on state resources from the state general fund. So at the state level, they say, Salem-Keizer, you should get this much money for your students. And out of this pot of money, we know that 25% of it comes from your property taxes, and the other 75% we're going to fill in with the state general fund resources. So the way Oregon currently defines their equity of resources is in the state school fund is by that equalization across districts, and also by how they count our kids. They also have a number of other subgrants that come to us that are part of that equity work. But for the state school fund, the way they make it an equity-based formula is based on how they count our kids. It's not a reimbursement grant, so we do not submit receipts and they pay us back. We are given the money and need to develop a budget, which you are a part of, and we determine with you and then with the school board how best to spend the resources. It's attended for all the operations of the district. So yes, for teachers, but also for custodians, bus drivers, all of that. It is budgeted on a biennium. So we are in the second year of the biennium as we are preparing for next year's budget. We're in the 21-23 biennium. When we were in the budget process last year, the legislature was in session, and those that were on the budget committee last year and on the board, you'll remember that I came in and presented you a budget that was based on what I was projecting the number might be. So we initially adopted the budget based on revenue of $9.1 billion because the legislature was in session. Somewhere in that timeline, the legislature decided how much they were really going to allocate to schools, which was then $9.3 billion. So when I came in with my budget message, I was just clear about what we knew about revenue and what we didn't know, and then tried to make plan A and plan B best based on what I could predict might happen. The way the state school fund works is in the first year of the biennium, they always allocate out to schools 49% of the revenue. And in the second year of the biennium, they allocate 51%. So they do that so schools can plan for, districts can plan for what are always escalation of costs in the second year of a budget. But we know going in, here's our revenue for the biennium. So in the second year of the biennium, there's not a lot often that changes within the budget because we have already predicted our revenue based on what we know the legislature has allocated. All right, this is just a slide to show you kind of the history of the state school fund. The legislature made a calculated move in the last biennium, which was to only adjust to 9.3 billion at the state level. They did that because they knew there were some federal resources coming into school districts, but it isn't truly a full funding of current service level across the state. So when we calculated current service level, I think we were at like 9.7, 9.8 billion would be current service level authorized if the state had said, here's your state school fund. So just to know that as we go into next school year, we'll be gearing up again for another legislative session that will be really important to monitor. And we're also going to begin watching what happens when the federal relief funds drop off, because we will either have to place those positions back into our general operating costs, or reduce those positions moving forward. So it's going to be a really critical time over the next 3 years to keep close eye on the financial health of the district. So a little bit about the state school fund and the student weights. So every student in our school district gets what we call one weight. So that means if they're going to give you $100 per student, every student gets $100 in your big pot of money for the student. But students that need additional support, and this is where they call this their equity formula, they're given a different weight, additional weights in the system. So our students on IEPs, our special education student, get an additional weight. So they get the additional $100 plus $100 more. So that's an additional weight in the system. The cap of special education is at 11%. And I think at the district level right now, we're between 15 and 16% of our students are identified as students with disabilities. Our English language learners, you get a 0.5 weight. Pregnant and parenting, you get an additional weight. Students in poverty or foster care, you get a 0.25 additional weight. And then neglected and delinquent youth, if you have students in facility placement in your community, there's some additional weighting for that as well. So when we get funded based on our ADMW weighted funding. So we take our enrollment, and then students who have additional weights are added to that, and then we get paid on an ADMW. So our enrollment is around 39,400 students, but our ADMW is over 50,000 because we're adding those additional weights in our system. Just a quick look at our enrollment history to make it, just to put it based on Salem-Keizer. We did start some declining enrollment in 2018-19. So we were beginning to watch a bubble move through our system. So we had our elementary numbers were starting to drop because we were having fewer incoming kindergarten students. And then we saw a bubble of kids going through the system, and now that bubble of kids are also graduating. So that's been one thing we've been watching. But the other thing is, as we know, the pandemic has had a huge drop in public school attendance across the state. And we haven't started to recover those yet. So you can see that our numbers are going down because of just decreasing in enrollment in general, those incoming kinders, and the pandemic. So across the system in Oregon, there's been a loss of about 36,000 students. And every time I say that number, I have to look at Sarah because I can't believe how big the number is. So about 36,000 students across the system and we're seeing probably less than the average pattern in Salem-Keizer. We believe between 1,500 and 2,000 students we've lost since the pandemic. And then you combine that on top of the smaller incoming kinder classes, you can see the impact. This is my 18th year as an Oregon superintendent, and what you don't want to have happen is declining enrollment and declining state resources, because I've been in places and I've watched where that's happened during the recession, and it's a very financially devastating picture for a school district, and it's also a financially devastating outcome for kids when you really have to begin laying off educators and classified employees that are serving your students. So every school district in Oregon went through that in about 2007, 2008, and might have even gone through, I don't remember what the worst year was at this point, but there was one school year where at least once, maybe twice, they had changed the state school fund allocation and actually took money away from districts during the school year. So it's not a place you want to be, but you always have to be thinking, looking ahead to see what's happening economically in Oregon, what's happening with your enrollment, what's happening legislatively with their ability to fund schools at the level they need to be funded. And right now we've been in some okay financial years for a couple years now, which has been great to see. And I don't know, maybe Levy's the person that might remember when I finally got to say, hey, I get to add in a budget for the first time in about 11 years in my career. So anyway, so next, and I'm going pretty fast, but then I'll pause for questions before we get to the budget book. So here's kind of how the phases of budget development work. Phase one is the budget development process. We are in that now, and we've been in it since about December. Sarah starts her work in December by really taking kind of where we are and beginning to roll up the staffing levels and the salary levels and the costs of goods and services into the next year's budget. So we have about a 4-month process, maybe even 5-month ahead of ever coming to the budget committee. So the budget committee is phase 2 in the process, and that's where we're gearing up for that now. For us, that begins on May 3rd, when I release the budget message to the full budget committee, which includes the 7 board and the 7 select appointed budget committee members. Then phase 3 is the school board's adoption of the budget, and they take action on levying taxes. In that is also our bond levy, and is part of that levying of taxes. And then phase 4 is we implement the adopted budget. We bring it back to the board if there is a significant change in revenue and expenditures that require a supplemental budget. So when you see on our website, I'll show you where we adopted, and then we have a second budget that is our supplemental budget, because this current school board took action on some changes that had happened related to some contractual obligations and increase in revenue. And that was called our supplemental budget process. So in theory, the budget that was adopted by the school board in June of 2021 no longer is there. It's the supplemental budget that we're working under at this point. All right, so I thought it was great to just kind of center on what's the budget committee's main functions. And I've worked with some of the information from Oregon School Boards Association, and looking at the law as well. So this isn't Christy Perry made up budget committee functions, but based on what is legal requirements. So the budget committee holds a series of public meetings to review, discuss, make additions or deletions, and approve the budget that the district budget officer proposes. So the budget officer is me through and Bob. So we work on that together. Once you approve the budget, you send it to the board, and the school board adopts it. So hopefully by about the end of May at our last meeting, the board or the budget committee will approve it, and then they pass it to the school board, who then adopts it in June. The committee's work is done once it sends a proposed budget to the board for adoption. So once you approve, your work is finished until we come back the next year and reconvene the budget committee again. Often in Salem-Keizer, we will say to our budget committee members, hey, we've got this presentation coming up and we think it will be of interest for you. And so we'll say, hey, why don't you watch in on the budget at the school board meeting, because we know you're interested in this, and it will help you have some context of the district in the budget committee process. One thing that's hard is you're looking at numbers. but we all care most about what happens for kids. So my job is always to help you see the numbers and where we place things and help you know what happens for kids, because that's why we are here and why we care. So that's my job, to try to do both of those for you, even though what you're really doing is adopting or approving, and then the board's adopting a really big number, which is over $1 billion last year. But what we care most about is what's happening for kids in classrooms. So what happens at the first budget committee meeting? Our very first budget committee meeting will be on May 3rd. And at that meeting, you'll elect your officers. So you'll elect your chair and vice chair. You'll receive the budget meeting or the budget message at that point. You'll review kind of how we manage the decision-making process. We'll review BG 12, which is your rules that the board has adopted. And just as a side note, public comment is not heard at the first meeting. However, you hear public comment at subsequent meetings, because we want to let everyone hear the budget committee message first. So in the budget message, I'll explain the proposed budget. I'll give you as much information in about, usually it's between 45 minutes and an hour of as much information that will help you understand the budget. And it must also contain a brief description of our financial policies that are reflected and explain the important features of the budget. I'll also share with you kind of what our assumptions are, because sometimes assumptions change. So sometimes I'll say to you, or I'll give you the assumptions, hey, we're still in bargaining with our association partners. So I've made an assumption in this budget of X for any cost of living increases, so that you know the assumptions, and also within those assumptions, what might change. The budget message will also feature any significant changes from last year's budget in revenue or appropriation, and explain any major changes in our financial policies. So when do you get a copy of it? Because what people really like to be able to do is get their copy and then really spend time understanding it. So but we release it when at that first meeting. So law requires that the budget committee gets the budget first, before just, kind of almost exactly the same time as the public gets it. And we release it when I give the budget message. So as I'm giving the budget message, if we're in person, we'll be distributing hard copies once that budget committee or message is complete. If we are virtual, we'll have a way to get those to you. But at the same time, simultaneously, we post it online for the public so that they are getting it at the same time that you're getting it, because that's really important in the legal requirements for the proposed budget. So that's when you get the budget message. Prior to that, you can look at any previous budgets, and these information meetings are all based on this year's budget. I won't do any sharing of what's going to be in next year's budget, because that will happen on May 3rd. All right. Before I take this down and give you a couple minutes to pause for some questions, I want to be sure that you see this is on our website, and the public sees that this is on our website. I am going to work today from the adopted budget, only because I have a hard copy of it, and it's easier for me to navigate my notes in a hard copy version. But you can see that when the board adopted approved a supplemental budget, we immediately had a new document that we placed on our website, so that the public can see that our supplemental budget is there, and they can see all the parts of it. So when we get ready to look in the budget book a little bit to walk through some of the things I just shared with you, we're going to go to the adopted budget on our website. I had one more thought. Oh, a question came up from one of the budget committee members today that I thought would be good for all of us to hear. The question was, how often is the district financials audited? And we have a legal requirement and a moral and ethical requirement to do ongoing audits annually of our books. So, and I think that we even place our comprehensive financial review on our website. And so we have a comprehensive audit that happens once a year. We are then also required to share that with ODE by, I think it's December 31st. If we miss the deadline, they definitely email us quickly. They review our audit for any findings. And I will tell you, we have had a very strong and clean audit. Just about, the findings every now and then are some little things that we tweak. They also do a check-in on our internal controls and things like that as well. So, and it's when the auditors are in the building, it's a very busy time for fiscal services. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and open up for questions on any of the content that I provided before we dive into the budget book.
I had a quick question, Christy. I just wanted to, when you mentioned the state revenue, does that include all sources? So it would be like the lottery, unclaimed properties, Student Success Act, things like that?
So a few of those are that you mentioned, like the lottery, and I'm going to look at Sarah here, but I think the lottery comes into the state. So it doesn't come directly to us. I think that goes to the state school fund. Within the state school fund that comes to us, that is, so I've got to figure out how best the Student Investment Act or the investment account, those dollars come to us differently.
Okay.
So the state school fund comes into the general fund, and I'll show you in the budget book where that is. The SIA comes in a separate, almost like a grant, and is budgeted outside of the gen fund.
And so what we're focused on is the general fund budget. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that is correct. Although you're adopting or approving the entire budget, and those funds like SIA and our IDEA and our title grants and all of those are included as a separate in funds that are outside of our gen fund. So you're really approving all of that, but those funds are very restricted and have specific purposes. So there's very little room to move anything in those funds. And we don't budget to the level of detail. Does that help?
Yes, that actually explains it perfectly. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's a great question. Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to add on anything I said? Okay. What else for questions?
What's the time frame between us actually getting the proposed budget and the next meeting that occurs with public comment?
Yeah, I think as I looked at the timeline today, it's May 3rd is the budget message, and then I think the first meeting is like around May 17th. I just wrote that down today. And what we will do is I'll give you the budget message, and then I'll say, if you could start thinking of your questions and get us your questions in writing, and we start collecting then those questions so that when we come in on the 17th and when we have public comment, that 17th meeting, I'll do everything I can to answer as many questions as I can in front for the full budget committee. It doesn't mean, you know, quick little one-off questions we can't answer quickly to help people process, but I'll try to bring all of those answers into the budget process, either into the budget committee meeting, either within presentations, or I'll just click through answers to questions, and then we'll do public comment. So that's how that next meeting will go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, so with that, I'm hopeful that you've had a minute and maybe drop the link to the chat in the chat for the adopted budget. And again, we're going to work on from the adopted budget, not the supplemental budget. And I'm just going to kind of walk you through how it's laid out. And again, I apologize that this will be somewhat repetitive for people that have been in this before. So maybe give me a thumbs up if you've gotten to the book or the online.
Christy, it's not in, there's no link in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry. There it
Oh,
is.
there it is. Thank you.
Yep.
Sarah, that looks like the supplemental. Christy, you wanted to work from the adopted.
I did. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so the first page, and I'm looking at page numbers at the bottom that are actually printed in the book. I just want to take you to page 6, which is the superintendent's budget message. Not going to go through it all, but I want you to be able to see what happens in that first budget meeting is this written budget message will be in your book, but I will present from the budget message in a formal presentation. So you'll get this in written format, and then I'll go through a series of slides. And then I will also ensure that during that budget committee meeting, you get the slides. So you have the budget message and the slides to review from. Especially within the slides will be, you know, some big pie graphs to show our big numbers, to show overall how we spend dollars that aren't always included in the text and the pictures within the budget message. I had this little exercise where I was looking back at some of my previous work and looking at sequence of things. I was trying to figure out when we'd had some major budget reductions, and the budget message should tell the story of what's happening at the time, as well as what changes you're making within the budget message. So I could, as I was tracing back, I could see exactly when SIA was funded. I went back to my former district and looked at some budget reductions. I could see some school improvement funds that had come at one point. So as I reviewed those, it told the story of what was going on in our district and with our students at the time. So the next page I want to take you to is page 20. And this is our enrollment page. And earlier I talked about enrollment and ADM. There's one more formula in their ADM, extended ADMW. If anyone is so excited to learn more about the state school fund, we'll describe extended ADMW, because it's the way the state helps districts so that if they lose students, there isn't this big cliff. So we saw that with the districts that are the wildfire districts that lost a lot of students. The extended ADMW helped protect them for a little bit of time as they were trying to recoup students. So anyway, a whole nother story there, but I can spend time on extended ADMW if that's of interest to you. So, but if you look at Salem-Keizer, you can see that our average enrollment is there, but also our ADMW, and always the last line there is always going to be projected. So we have done a projection for next year, and it will be reflected in the budget book. And the ADMW is always higher. One thing that's been interesting for Salem-Keizer is we've always had a strong number of students who are English language learners. Well, that has started to decline. But what's also now happening is that we are getting a number of refugee students, and now our numbers are starting to climb back up again. So it's just an interesting fact about Salem-Keizer. The other thing that we have a lot of students living in poverty. I think we have the most students living in poverty, the most migrant students, and the most students learning English of any school district in the state. And that's why you see how our weights are much higher than what our enrollment is. Other districts have a different scenario when that page is shown in their budget book. So the next page I want to draw your attention to, and I definitely won't read any of these to you, but there's always pages in here about your budget policies, procedures, and regulations. So on page 22 is where this is lined out for you. And it gives about halfway down on page 22, it shows how we, the steps we take in the budget preparation process. And then on page 23, at the top of page 23, it gives the rules for what the school board can do. So the budget committee does one thing, but the school board can only do a certain amount of something different from what the budget committee approves before they adopt. And then I talked about a supplemental budget that the board did this year. So halfway down on page 23, is kind of the rules around supplemental budget process. We publish all that in there every year because we think it's really as part of the requirements of your budget book and really important to share kind of the rules around public budgets. All right, so the next thing I want to show you is on page 25, and these are our budget assumptions. These are the assumptions we used last year when we were, oh gosh, all of a sudden I looked at the time, when we were adopting the budget. One of the assumptions that's always a big cost driver is PERS. So you'll see about the 6th bullet down some information on PERS, but also in this it tells you exactly what happens with the what we're doing with our negotiated contracts, where we're at, what we're estimating for escalation of services, and our estimated enrollment. Okay, because we're at 4 minutes till stopping time, and I promised a hard stop. So a couple things. And then I'll have a couple minutes for questions. If you have some questions related to the content, quick and easy to answer questions about things you're seeing in this budget book, if you email them to Amanda, we'll track those and see if we can bring some of the answers to those questions next week. Next week, we want to talk about the student investment account, the ESSER funding, the emergency relief funding, and some of those other large grants we get, just so you can understand those as well and show you where those are in the budget book as well. Okay, so questions to Amanda. We are happy to answer as many questions as we can, especially if they're quick and easy questions. We can't, though, in this week timeline, spend time on in-depth responses. So if you could do kind of quick and easy questions, happy to do that. If you have some in-depth things you want to know about, we also might set up some one-on-one meetings. So with that, just in the last 2 minutes, questions. And I
I have
obviously,
a question about how to,
go ahead.
sorry, I know that when we have the budget, you ask for questions to be sent to you.
Mhm.
But there was some issue about how to communicate questions with you since it's supposed to be to the public, like two people is too many or something like that. Can you go over how to ask those questions the correct
Yeah.
way so we don't have trouble with public?
Good question. Yeah, so when you address a question, if you send it to Amanda and I, that's great. If it's just to me or just to Amanda, that's also fine. But don't ever include other members of the board or the budget committee. Just ask your question as an individual, because then you run the risk of some public meeting laws things. I will always share the questions as I answer them with the whole group in public. The one thing that sometimes happens is if you email with seven other budget committee members and you start a reply all, that is called an online meeting that's happening outside of the public eye. So that's the reason you just want to email directly to Amanda and I, and then we'll respond to the whole group. Sometimes we'll even email information to the whole group. We will always put the board and budget committee in a blind CC, so you don't accidentally reply all and start a meeting outside of the public meeting process. Great question, Barbara. What else for questions? All right, we're at 12:45, so I'm going to turn it back over to you, Vice Chair Carson Cunningham.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. This meeting is adjourned. See you next time.
Yep. Have a great day. See you next week.
Hi.